Why are people afraid of themselves? At first glance, this question might sound strange. After all, aren't we supposed to know ourselves? Aren't we the ones living in our own minds and bodies? Why would we fear what is already part of us? But if you take a moment to reflect, you may begin to feel the truth behind this question. Many people do feel uneasy, even terrified, when they come too close to who they really are. And Carl Jung believed that this fear, this deep, quiet resistance to the inner world, is one of the most important obstacles to self-understanding and ultimately to wholeness. To begin, let's think about what we usually show to the world. Most of us move through life wearing a kind of mask. Jung called this the persona. It's the image we present to others, the roles we play, the version of ourselves we think will be accepted. Maybe you act strong at work, or kind in public, or agreeable with family, but beneath that there are thoughts you don't say out loud, emotions you hide, parts of you that feel unworthy, broken, angry, or unsure. These parts don't fit the mask, and so we push them down, hoping they stay silent. But they don't stay silent forever. Jung believed that what we repress doesn't disappear. It moves into the unconscious. And in the unconscious, it begins to form what he called the shadow. The shadow is made up of everything we refuse to accept about ourselves. It is the opposite of the persona. If the persona is the light, the shadow is the darkness we'd rather not see. Now here's where fear comes in. The moment we start looking inward, deeply, honestly, we come face to face with this shadow. And it can be unsettling. Why? Because it reveals that we are not always who we thought we were. We're not always as kind or strong or pure as we'd like to believe. We might see our jealousy, our rage, our desire for control, our capacity to hurt. This doesn't mean we are bad people, it means we are human. But admitting that can feel like a threat to our identity. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." That means true growth doesn't come from pretending to be perfect. It comes from turning toward the shadow, toward the parts of us that scare us, and seeing them clearly without judgment. But this is not easy. And that's why people are afraid of themselves. Fear of the self is often disguised. It doesn't always show up as panic or anxiety. Sometimes it shows up as distraction. We keep busy so we don't have to feel. We scroll through our phones, binge on entertainment, drown ourselves in work. Anything to avoid the silence where the inner voice begins to speak. Other times it shows up as projection. Instead of seeing what's inside of us, we project it onto others. We criticize them, blame them, resent them. Without realizing we're really seeing something in them that reflects our own unacknowledged traits. Jung saw this all the time in his patients. A man who hated his boss's arrogance might be denying his own pride. A woman angry at her friend's selfishness might be rejecting her own needs. Projection protects the ego, but it keeps us from growth. And sometimes fear of the self shows up as shame. We feel a sense of guilt or worthlessness without understanding where it comes from. Often it's rooted in rejected parts of ourselves, needs that were denied, emotions that were punished, instincts that were suppressed. This shame can run deep, shaping our lives in invisible ways. So how do we face this fear? How do we begin the journey inward without becoming overwhelmed? The answer, Jung would say, is with compassion and courage. You don't dive into the unconscious all at once. You approach it gently over time with help if needed. You learn to observe yourself without harshness. You begin to see that the shadow is not your enemy. It's part of you, and in fact, it contains not only your flaws but your hidden strengths. Jung emphasized that the shadow is not only dark, it also contains gold. Qualities you may have pushed away, like assertiveness, creativity, sensuality, passion, because they were not welcomed in your environment. When you begin to explore the shadow, you don't just face what is painful. You also reclaim what is powerful. You become more whole. Let's pause and reflect on what this means. If you've ever felt afraid of your emotions, your desires, or your past, it doesn't mean you are broken. It means you are standing at the doorway of transformation. And this is where real healing begins. Jung believed that this journey towards self-understanding is sacred. It is not just therapy. It is a spiritual path. He called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Not just a collection of roles and masks. Not just a bundle of unconscious reactions, but a full, integrated person, someone who knows their shadow, accepts it, and works with it, not against it. This is not the path for everyone. It takes honesty, it takes patience, and yes, it takes bravery, but if you walk it, your fear begins to shift. It no longer controls you, it becomes your teacher. You begin to see that the self is not something to fear. It is something to discover. And every step toward that discovery brings more clarity, more energy, and more peace. We live in a world that often encourages us to look outward. Success, appearance, productivity. These are the values we're taught to chase. But the soul doesn't grow in the spotlight. It grows in the quiet, in the hidden places, in the moments when you sit with yourself and ask, who am I really? Carl Jung helped us ask that question, not with fear but with curiosity. He showed us that the self is not a monster to be tamed. It is a mystery to be understood. And in that understanding, we find freedom. In the next part, we will go deeper. We'll explore how childhood, society, and even religion shape the way we see ourselves, and how those influences contribute to our fear of the inner world. We'll also look at real practices you can use to begin meeting your shadow with openness. This is where philosophy becomes practice, and this is where transformation begins. To understand why people are afraid of themselves, we need to look at where this fear begins. And for most of us, it begins in childhood. Carl Jung believed that the seeds of the shadow are planted early. As children, we are born with a full range of emotions, impulses, and potentials. But as we grow, we quickly learn that not all parts of us are acceptable. Some feelings are rewarded. Others are punished, some behaviors are welcomed, others are rejected. If you grew up in a home where anger was seen as bad, you learned to hide your anger. If your tears were met with disapproval, you learned to suppress your sadness. If your curiosity made adults uncomfortable, you learned to stay quiet. Slowly, you began to split off parts of yourself to survive, to be loved, to feel safe. These rejected parts didn't go away, they went underground. They became part of your shadow. Now, this isn't about blaming parents. Most caregivers do the best they can. But they are also shaped by their own shadows, and society plays a big role too. From a young age, we're taught what's normal, what's successful, what's attractive. We're bombarded with images of who we should be, how we should act, what we should feel. There's very little space for authenticity. And so we adapt. We build our personas to fit the mold. We become who we think we're supposed to be. But deep down, something feels off. Something is missing. That something is often the true self. hidden behind layers of conditioning. Jung believed that every person has an inner drive toward wholeness. Even if it's buried, that drive never disappears. It shows up in dreams, in longings, in sudden insights. It shows up in discomfort, in the feeling that something isn't quite right, even when everything looks fine on the outside. That discomfort is often the soul calling us back to ourselves. But answering that call means facing the parts we've denied, and that can feel like a threat to the identity we've carefully built. Here's an example. Imagine a man who has always been praised for being logical, rational, and in control. He's built his life around those traits. But one day he starts having anxiety attacks. He feels overwhelmed by emotion and it scares him. Not because emotions are bad, but because he was taught to fear them. His identity is built on being in control, so feeling vulnerable feels like falling apart. Or imagine a woman who has always been the caretaker, the one who puts others first, who is always kind and accommodating. But underneath, she feels resentment, exhaustion, a quiet rage that she doesn't understand. She tries to push it down, but it leaks out in passive aggression, in illness and burnout. She's afraid to feel her anger because it threatens the good identity she's created. But that anger is part of her truth, and until she faces it, she can't be whole. This is the dynamic Jung explored so deeply. The more rigid our persona, the more powerful our shadow becomes, and the more we fear that shadow, the more disconnected we become from ourselves. Religion can also play a role in this disconnection. In many traditions, there's a strong emphasis on good versus evil, light versus darkness. But if this teaching is too black and white, it can make people fear their natural impulses. Jung respected religion deeply, but he also warned against what he called moral repression. When people are taught to see certain parts of themselves as sinful or shameful rather than human, they may split off those parts and bury them. But buried parts don't disappear. They grow in the dark, and eventually they surface, sometimes in destructive ways. Jung believed that real spirituality is not about rejecting the self. It's about integrating it. It's about bringing light to the shadow, not pretending the shadow isn't there. He said the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, and yet that is also the most liberating thing. So how do we begin this work? First, we need to create space for reflection. That means making time to be alone, to be quiet, to listen inward. Solitude is not loneliness, it is the sacred space where the soul speaks. In that space, we can begin to notice our patterns, how we react, what we avoid, what triggers us. These are clues to the shadow. Next, we can begin to explore our dreams. Jung believed that dreams are a direct line to the unconscious. They speak in symbols and images, often revealing parts of us that the conscious mind resists. You don't have to be an expert in dream interpretation. Just start writing them down. Notice what repeats. Ask yourself, what might this be trying to show me about myself? Another practice is journaling. Not the kind of journaling where you record events, but the kind where you ask deep questions. What am I feeling right now? What am I afraid to admit? What part of myself do I judge the most? Writing can bypass the inner critic and allow truth to emerge. Therapy can also be a powerful tool, especially with someone trained in Jungian or depth psychology. A good therapist can help you see what you can't see on your own. They can hold space for the parts of you that feel too heavy, too messy, too complex. art can be a pathway too. Jung used drawing and painting to explore his unconscious. He created what he called mandalas, circular symbols representing the self. You don't have to be an artist. Just pick up a pen or brush and let your hand move. Let the inner world express itself without censorship. And most importantly, approach yourself with compassion. This is not about fixing yourself. It's about meeting yourself. The shadow is not the enemy. It is the wounded part of you that needs love. It is the strong part of you that was once shamed. It is the creative part of you that was once dismissed. When you welcome it, you begin to heal. Let's return to the original question. Why are people afraid of themselves? Because they've been taught to be. Because they've been hurt. Because they've been conditioned to see only parts of themselves as worthy. But you are more than a mask. You are more than a role. You are a whole, complex, beautiful being, light and dark, joy and sorrow, strength and vulnerability. Carl Jung didn't want us to be perfect. He wanted us to be real, to know ourselves deeply, to face the shadow not with fear but with openness. Because when we do, we become more alive, more grounded, more human. In the final part, we'll look at what happens when we embrace the shadow. We'll explore the transformation that follows, how facing ourselves can lead to greater creativity, deeper relationships, and a profound sense of purpose. We'll also talk about the role of courage, myth, and meaning in Jung's vision of the self. The journey is not easy, but it is worth it. When a person begins the work of facing their shadow, something remarkable happens. The fear that once felt overwhelming begins to lose its power. Not because it disappears, but because it is seen clearly. Fear thrives in the dark, but once we shine a light on it, once we look it in the eye, it often changes shape. We begin to realize that what we feared was not a monster, but a part of ourselves waiting to be accepted. Carl Jung believed that this integration is the path to wholeness. He called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are, not who the world told you to be, not who you pretend to be, but the full, authentic, integrated self. This doesn't mean becoming perfect, it means becoming real. It means holding the tension of opposites, light and shadow, good and bad, joy and sorrow, and discovering that all of it belongs. This is where power comes from, not the kind of power that dominates or controls, but the quiet, steady power of someone who knows who they are. A person who has walked through the inner darkness and emerged with self-knowledge. This kind of power cannot be faked. It radiates from within. It creates presence, integrity, clarity. When you stop running from yourself, you gain access to energy that was previously tied up in repression. Think of how much effort it takes to hide parts of yourself, to keep secrets from your own heart. To pretend. That effort is exhausting. But when you no longer need to pretend, that energy becomes available for creation, for connection, for purpose. You also become more compassionate. When you faced your own darkness, you become less judgmental of others. You understand that everyone carries a shadow. Everyone is struggling in ways we can't always see. This doesn't mean you tolerate abuse or abandon boundaries, but it does mean you hold others with more humanity. You listen more deeply. You respond instead of react. In relationships, shadow work creates depth. Many conflicts arise because people project their shadow onto others. We accuse our partners, friends, or enemies of being what we cannot accept in ourselves. But when we do our own inner work, we take back those projections. We take responsibility for our feelings. This doesn't make relationships easier, but it makes them more honest, more intimate, more real. Jung also believed that the shadow holds the key to creativity. Many great artists, writers, and visionaries have drawn from their inner darkness. Not because darkness is glamorous, but because it is real. When we allow ourselves to feel the full range of our humanity, we create from a deeper place. We speak truths that resonate. We express what others feel but can't say. Even in myth, the journey into the underworld is often the turning point. The hero must descend before they rise. They must face the dragon before they find the treasure. This is not just a story, it is a symbol of the inner journey. The dragon is the shadow, the treasure is the self, and the descent is necessary. It cannot be skipped, but it takes courage, real courage, the kind of courage that says, I am willing to see myself as I am, not as I wish I were, not as I hope others see me, but as I truly am. Messy, complex, contradictory, and full of life. This is the beginning of transformation. You may feel resistance. That's normal. The ego doesn't like change. It wants to stay safe, familiar, in control. But growth requires discomfort. Healing requires truth. And truth often begins with discomfort. So how do we keep going when it gets hard? We remember why we started. We remember that the goal is not to become someone else. The goal is to return to ourselves, to reclaim the parts we lost, to become whole. It also helps to find community. You don't have to walk this path alone. Whether through friends, mentors, therapists, or spiritual guides, it matters to be seen, to be heard, to be held in your truth. Isolation breeds shame. Connection breeds healing. Spiritual practice can also ground you. Meditation, prayer, ritual, or nature, whatever helps you stay connected to something greater than your mind. Jung was deeply spiritual. He believed that the psyche longs for meaning, that beyond the personal shadow lies the collective unconscious, a deeper well of wisdom, myth, and archetype that connects all human beings. The more we integrate our shadow, the more we can access this deeper layer. We begin to see patterns in our lives. We notice synchronicities, those mysterious moments when things just seem to align. We feel guided, not by logic alone, but by something wiser, something older than thought. Jung called this the self, with a capital S. Not the ego, not the persona, but the deeper center of the psyche, the true self. This self is what we find when we stop being afraid of ourselves. It is what emerges when we embrace both light and dark, when we stop trying to be good and start trying to be whole. And when we do, we feel a kind of peace that the world cannot give or take away. You may still feel fear. That's okay. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to keep going despite it. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are not alone. You are a soul on a journey back to yourself, a journey that takes time, that requires patience, that demands honesty. Carl Jung's legacy is not just a set of theories, it is an invitation to turn inward, to face the mirror, to walk into the forest of the unconscious and find the parts of yourself you left behind. It is not easy, but it is sacred. As we close this series, remember this. The parts of you that you fear the most are often the parts that hold your greatest gifts. Your anger may be the beginning of your voice. Your sadness may be the root of your empathy. Your shadow may be the doorway to your soul. Do not be afraid of yourself. You are deeper than you know. You are wiser than you think, and you are more whole than you have ever been told. Thank you for walking this path with me. Until next time, stay grounded, stay open, and keep walking toward the truth of who you really are.